Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Today's video is US culture shock, American time zones. I'm going to let Lawrence explain this one. I'm going to get into it straight away. Please like and subscribe and let's see what Lawrence has to say.
That can't be real. The fact that America is a weird place will come as a surprise to absolutely nobody who watches the news. But believe it or not, it's sometimes weird in an adorable way. For instance, earlier I did something that I haven't done since 1998. I looked at my calendar and in it reminded me that soon here in America we're going to be altering our clocks. This is something we don't do in Britain until weeks later. It's a very confusing time of year and I need coffee. But it isn't just daylight saving that's unusual. After all, as I just alluded to, that happens in Britain too. Time zones in the United States can be a bit of a culture shock for somebody who grew up in Britain. Firstly, you should know I come from a country where there is just one time zone. If I were to drive from my hometown of Grimsby to, I don't know, the southwest coast of Wales, I will have driven through two countries, seen signposts in two different languages, and the time will be the same in my destination as it was in the place that I started. In other words, for the 26 years that I lived in Britain, I never had to think about time zones. I didn't even know time zones existed until I was about 9, and I only discovered that because I went on a 2-week holiday to Florida with my parents. I wasn't on my own. And so the mere concept of living in a country that has more than one time zone was alien to me at first. How did I combat this? I fought fire with fire. I became an alien myself.
Just to say, the time zone thing is in Europe. Like France is like it's like 14 miles away from us, France, and it's in a different time zone. It's an hour ahead. So, yeah.
I moved to America, and when I did, I was prepared that I would change time zones from my parents back in Britain. I understood I was moving to Eastern Standard Time. That's the time zone in central Indiana where I used to live. But then, you know, my first job in the country was working in a call center where you are talking to Americans all across the country, and actually in some cases in the US territories as well. So it meant that I was having to deal with people that were on multiple different time zones to me. America has 6 time zones if you don't include the territories. If you do include the territories, it has 9. So to somebody from a small country, that itself is quite weird because it speaks to just how large America is. And it is. But that's not where it ends. Because over the years of doing this channel, I've learned a lot about America as a whole, not just the places I've lived in. And so I have learned that the time zones in this country are a little odd. The first example that I'm going to give you actually involves the 2 states that I've lived in, Indiana and Illinois. For context, Illinois, where I currently live, is entirely on Central Time. For those of you not in the know, that is 1 hour behind Eastern Standard Time and is 6 hours behind Greenwich Mean Time, which is what we're on in Britain. Most of Indiana is on Eastern Standard Time. However, there are 2 portions of Indiana that are on Central Time, just like Illinois, Southwest Indiana and Northwest Indiana. And it's Northwest Indiana that I am most familiar with because every holiday, my wife and I drive down from Chicago to central Indiana to meet with her family. And once you enter Indiana, you don't just see the time alter by heading east, you also see it by heading south, which means that part of the Eastern Standard Time of Indiana is further west than part of the Central Time of Indiana. Why is this? Well, largely because there are other commuters that come out of Chicago to Northwest Indiana, and the ruling, I think at a local level, I don't know who makes these decisions, said that that area for Chicago commuters will retain Chicago's time. Several years ago, I visited another state that begins with I, Idaho. They have a more extreme example of what I was just talking about. It's basically a north-south divide. The southern half of Idaho, where I visited Boise, was on Mountain Time Zone, and the northern panhandle was on Pacific Time, even though Idaho is nowhere near the Pacific. For context, Mountain Time in southern Idaho and much of the Rocky Mountains is 1 hour behind Central Time here, 2 hours behind Eastern Standard Time, and 7 hours behind Great Britain. So when I flew due north from Boise to Coeur d'Alene, we went back in time by going north. I wanted to call myself in the past to see if I was still at the airport in Boise. Also, if you're wondering why I'm pronouncing it Boise instead of Boise, that's how the locals told me to say it. So if they lied, take it up with them. And actually, when I was in Idaho, I got curious about all of this and I started looking at the nearby surrounding states to see if there are any other quirks that I should know about. And that brought me straight to Oregon. This is a state that can say, hello, we are actually by the Pacific, Pacific time zone suits us. What are you doing, Idaho? To which Idaho could just turn around and say, what are you doing with our mountains? Because in the east of the state, for some inexplicable reason, Oregon is on mountain time. Are there mountains in that part of Oregon? I don't know. And you might think, well, it's Oregon, you know, keep Portland weird. Well, Portland is on the other side of the state, for one, so they've got nothing to do with this. And secondly, I need to point out something that I don't know if you're aware of this. I don't know if anyone's talked about this, if this is one of those like pub quiz pieces or not. But because Oregon is partially on mountain time, and because Florida is partially on central time, Florida and Oregon are only one time zone apart. Oregon's facing the Pacific Ocean. Florida is facing the Atlantic Ocean.
That
occasionally the Gulf of whatever we're calling it these days. There's no way in my head that people in the Florida Panhandle are calling relatives in Eastern Oregon and only being an hour ahead. I'm not having that. There's some warped, messed up logic going on with both the US map and whoever it is who creates time zones. Who is that? The Interstate Commerce Commission. And then we get onto the topic of daylight saving time. Nobody wants to alter the clocks, even though digital technology largely does that for us, because it messes us up for, you know, a day, and then we're used to it. Anyway, the point is, America is going to put its clocks forward on March the 9th. Britain, meanwhile, doesn't change things until March 30th. So for me, there's always a 3-week window in which I completely forget about this disparity when contacting people back in Britain. And this is a big problem when I'm calling Uncle Toby, because he only gets one call a day. And if I get the time wrong in my head and he was waiting for me, that's his entire call for the day gone. I know we don't have sympathy for him. But something to do with daylight saving that I've only realized since doing this channel is that I lied a moment ago. I said America puts its clocks forward, but to quote the Secretary of Defense from Independence Day, that's not entirely accurate. Because there are 2 states that decided we're not going to take part in daylight saving, that's for you idiots. That? And that's Arizona and Hawaii. Hawaii will make the claim, we're close to the equator, our sunlight situation is pretty consistent throughout the year, but in like not that accent. Oh, wow. And that's fair enough. I'd probably do the same thing too if I was a collection of islands in the Pacific. But what is Arizona's excuse? It's a desert, right? That is also valid. But yes, the contiguous state of Arizona also doesn't observe daylight saving. That's not entirely accurate. Oh, really, Mr. Secretary? Why is that? Because of here. Oh yes, that place in northeastern Arizona that does observe daylight saving while the rest of the state points and laughs. So what's going on there? Well, I actually spoke to my patrons about this on my secret live stream.
I'm just thinking this through in my head. This is what happens. I think through, how do you want to structure things? I think Arizona's its own section.
For those of you who don't know, this area of Arizona is a Native American reservation known as the Navajo Nation, and they, unlike the rest of Arizona, observe daylight saving. You'll also notice that the Hopi Reservation, which is surrounded by the Navajo Nation, doesn't observe it. So commuting down here would make the Chicago to Indianapolis route feel like a mere introduction to time travel. And that's my...
So how does that even happen? How does one tiny bit of the state observe it and the rest of the state doesn't? That is crazy.
My 2 cents on why American time zones are weird. At least I thought they were, until I looked at a map of world time zones. It turns out that due to many countries' environments and no doubt bureaucracy, the uneven looking time zones are actually the norm, and that Britain, having only one time zone, is perhaps itself the weird one after all.
Maybe we are the weird ones.
Thank you to my patrons who make these videos.
Thank you so much for watching this video. Lawrence's links are in the description as always. Good video. Yeah, crazy. The time zone situation is crazy. It always confuses me. But we get used to it, don't we, guys? Make sure you guys like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Have a fantastic day.